A 1994 Toyota Supra with a 2JZ GTE twin-turbo just sold for $176,000. That's not a typo. A 30-year-old Japanese car with 65,000 miles on it sold for the price of a house in most of the country. A house. For a Supra. The same car that was $40,000 new. The same car your dad's coworker bought because he thought the Fast and the Furious was cool. That car. $176,000. And it's not just Supras. A clean R34 Nissan Skyline GT-R regularly sells for $200,000 to $350,000 or more. A stock Honda NSX commands $100,000 to $200,000, depending on condition. A well-preserved Mazda RX-7 FD is $50,000 to $80,000. A Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 6 Tommy McKinnon Edition, a sedan from 1999, sells for more than a brand-new Porsche 911. These are not exotic cars. They were not expensive when they were new. They were Japanese performance cars that sold for $25,000 to $50,000 in the 1990s. Attainable, middle-class sports machines that regular people bought and drove daily. Now they're worth more than luxury cars that were 3 times their original price. A car that depreciated to $8,000 on Craigslist in 2005 is now a $150,000 collectible. The appreciation isn't gradual, it's exponential, and it's still happening. The question every non-car person asks is simple. Why? Why are old Japanese cars worth so much money? What happened? What's driving this? The answer involves a specific period of Japanese engineering excellence, a federal import law with a 25-year waiting period, a global media phenomenon that turned cars into cultural icons, a community of enthusiasts who built an entire identity around these machines, and the basic economics of limited supply meeting explosive demand. Let's break it all down. First, let's clear up a term that gets used incorrectly about 90% of the time. JDM stands for Japanese Domestic Market. It refers specifically to vehicles and parts that were manufactured for sale in Japan, not exported to other countries. A 1995 Toyota Supra sold at a Toyota dealership in Osaka is JDM. The same car sold at a Toyota dealership in Atlanta is USDM, United States Domestic Market. The distinction matters because Japanese automakers often build different versions of the same car for different markets. The Japanese domestic version frequently had more power, different equipment, stricter quality standards, and features that weren't available in export models. The R34 Skyline GT-R was never officially sold in the United States. The Nissan Silvia S15 wasn't offered here. The Mitsubishi GTO, known as the 3000s GT in the US, had different tuning in its Japanese spec. The Honda Integra Type R in Japanese spec had subtle differences from the US market Integra Type R. True JDM cars were designed for Japanese roads, Japanese regulations, Japanese fuel quality, and Japanese consumers, who demanded a level of build quality and refinement that sometimes exceeded what manufacturers offered in export markets. This reputation for higher spec engineering became part of the JDM mystique. The idea that the real version of the car existed in Japan and what we got in the US was a slightly watered-down version, fueled desire for the genuine article. In casual conversation, JDM has evolved beyond its literal meaning to encompass the entire culture of Japanese performance cars, whether they're actually Japanese market vehicles or not. When someone says I'm into JDM cars, they typically mean Japanese sports cars from the 1980s and 90s in general, not specifically cars imported from Japan. The purists will correct you. The rest of the community knows what you mean. The prices of Japanese performance cars from the late 1980s through the early 2000s aren't inflated by nostalgia alone. That era was genuinely special in terms of what Japanese manufacturers were producing, and the specific conditions that made it happen may never exist again. In the late 1980s, Japan was in the midst of an economic bubble. The Japanese economy was booming. Corporations had enormous R&D budgets. Consumer confidence was high, and the Japanese auto industry was locked in an arms race. Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, and Subaru were all competing ferociously to build the best, fastest, most technologically advanced sports cars they could engineer. This competition produced an extraordinary generation of vehicles. The cars were over-engineered relative to their price point. Manufacturers poured money into technology that didn't make financial sense on a per-unit basis but made strategic sense in terms of brand prestige and engineering bragging rights. They were building legends, not just products. Some of the most iconic results: Toyota Supra A80, 1993-2002. The 2JZ GTE twin-turbo inline-six became one of the most legendary engines ever produced, capable of handling 1,000-plus horsepower on stock internals with aftermarket turbo upgrades. The 2JZ's strength and tunability are almost mythical. The Supra was a genuine grand tourer, comfortable, refined, fast, and nearly indestructible in terms of drivetrain durability. Nissan Skyline GTR R33, R34, 1989-2002. The Godzilla, the R32 GTR dominated Australian touring car racing so thoroughly that it was banned. The Atesa all-wheel drive system, the RB26DT twin-turbo inline-six, and the Super Hiace rear-wheel steering created a car that was a technological showcase. The R34, the final generation before the GTR became a standalone model, is the most sought after, partly because of its performance and partly because of its iconic status in media and culture. Honda NSX, 1990-2005. Ayrton Senna helped develop the chassis. It was the first production car with an all-aluminum monocoque body. The mid-mounted V6 revved to 8,000 RPM. It was a daily drivable supercar that embarrassed Ferraris at a fraction of the price, while being reliable enough to start every morning without drama. The NSX didn't just compete with exotic cars, it redefined what a mid-engine sports car could be. Mazda RX-7 FD, 1992-2002. The sequential twin-turbo rotary engine was exotic and unique. The chassis was balanced, lightweight, and gorgeous. The FD's curves are still cited as one of the most beautiful car designs ever produced. The rotary engine's high-revving character and distinctive power delivery created a driving experience unlike anything else on the road. Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution, 1992-2016. A rally-bred sedan with turbocharged all-wheel drive aggression. Each generation refined the formula. The Evo was raw, loud, violent, and absurdly fast for its price. It was a rally car with license plates, designed to homologate Mitsubishi's World Rally Championship entries and then sold to civilians who wanted that intensity for daily driving. Subaru Impreza WRX STI 1994-present. The other rally-bred turbocharged AWT sedan. The rivalry between the Evo and the STI defined an entire generation of enthusiasts. The STI's boxer engine rumble, the gold BBS wheels, the massive wing, it became an icon of accessible performance. Honda Integra Type R DC2, 1995-2001, the greatest front-wheel drive car ever built, a claim that's debated in the details but almost universally accepted in principle. Hand-ported intake manifold. B18C engine revving to 8,400 RPM. Limited slip differential, stripped-down weight. It was a masterclass in extracting maximum performance from minimal resources. These cars weren't special because they were Japanese. They were special because they represented a moment in time when Japanese manufacturers had the money, the motivation, the engineering talent, and a competitive drive to build cars that exceeded their price points by enormous margins. You were getting $100,000 worth of engineering for $30,000. That value proposition, amplified by time and scarcity, is a huge part of why they're worth so much today. One specific factor from this era deserves its own section, because it directly shaped the cars and their legacy. In 1989, Japanese automakers entered into a voluntary agreement, often called the Gentleman's Agreement, to limit the advertised power output of their vehicles to 276 horsepower, 280 PS in Japanese measurement. The ostensible reason was safety. The real reason was to avoid triggering government regulation of high-performance vehicles. The agreement didn't actually limit the power the cars made. it limited the power the manufacturers claimed the cars made. A Supra that Toyota said made 276 horsepower actually made closer to 320 or more from the factory. A Skyline GTR rated at 276 horsepower was dyno tested at 310 to 330 horsepower stock. Everybody knew the numbers were fictional. The agreement created a wink and nod culture where the real output was an open secret. This had two effects on the legend. First, it meant these cars were faster than they were supposed to be, which created a mystique of hidden power. Second, it meant the engines were significantly understressed for their actual capability. An engine making 320 horsepower that's only supposed to make 276 has headroom. That headroom translated to durability and tunability. The engines could handle far more power than they were producing, which made them ideal platforms for modification. The two JZs, the RB26, the 4G63, these engines became legendary for their strength partly because they were engineered to handle power levels well beyond their factory output. The gentleman's agreement was officially abandoned around 2004, but by then the cars it shaped had already become icons. The self-imposed limitation paradoxically made them more desirable, not less. The United States has a federal law, commonly called the 25-year rule, part of the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, that prohibits the importation of vehicles that were not originally manufactured for the U.S. market unless they are at least 25 years old. Vehicles under 25 years old must meet all U.S. safety and emissions standards, which foreign-spec vehicles generally don't. Bringing a non-compliant vehicle into compliance is prohibitively expensive, sometimes more than the car is worth, making legal import of most vehicles under 25 effectively impossible. Once a vehicle turns 25 years old, it's exempt from these requirements. It can be legally imported without meeting U.S. safety or emissions standards. This creates a rolling window of eligibility. Every year, a new model year becomes importable. The 25-year rule is the single most important factor in the JDM price explosion. Here's how it works in practice. The R32 Skyline GTR was produced from 1989 to 1994. U.S. enthusiasts knew about this car for decades. They saw it in magazines, in video games, in anime, in racing footage. They wanted one desperately, but they couldn't legally import one. Starting in 2014, the earliest R32s became eligible. Demand that had been building for 25 years was suddenly released. Prices spiked immediately. The same pattern repeated with every desirable JDM model as its eligibility window opened. The S13 Silvia, the R33 GTR, the Jezzy A80 Supra, the FD RX7 and Japanese spec. Each time a new model year crossed the 25-year threshold, a wave of importation and a corresponding price surge followed. The R34 Skyline GTR, the most desired of all, was produced from 1999 to 2002. The earliest R34s became eligible for import in 2024. The anticipation has driven prices to stratospheric levels even before mass importation began. Clean, low-mileage R34 GTRs have been selling in Japan for $200,000 to $400,000 or more, priced in anticipation of the U.S. market demand. The 25-year rule creates artificial scarcity for any vehicle under the threshold and a demand explosion for vehicles that cross it. It's a government-created supply constraint meeting decades of pent-up desire, and the price impact is enormous. Most JDM cars entering the United States come through a specific supply chain that's worth understanding because it directly affects what you'd pay and what you'd get. Japan has an extensive vehicle auction system, hundreds of physical auction houses where dealers, exporters, and brokers buy and sell used vehicles. The major auction houses, USS, TAA, HAA, process millions of vehicles per year. These auctions are the primary source for JDM cars destined for export. Each vehicle at auction receives a grading sheet, a detailed inspection document that rates the car's overall condition on a numerical scale, typically 1 to 5, with S being the highest. evaluates the interior and exterior condition separately, and notes every scratch, dent, rust spot, modification, and mechanical issue. The grading system is remarkably thorough by international standards. Japanese auction inspectors are looking for flaws that most American buyers wouldn't even notice. Cars graded 4 and above are considered clean, well-maintained vehicles. Grade 3 to 3.5 cars have moderate wear or minor issues. Below 3 typically means significant problems, accident history, heavy modifications, mechanical issues, or severe cosmetic damage. For the premium JDM models everyone wants, buyers are competing fiercely for the grade 4 and above cars, which drives those prices highest. The typical import pipeline works like this. A US-based importer or broker monitors Japanese auctions for eligible vehicles. When a desirable car appears, they bid on behalf of a customer or speculatively for inventory. If they win the car, it's transported to a Japanese port, shipped by container or roll-on roll-off vessel to the US, typically to ports in California, Texas, or the East Coast, cleared through customs with proper documentation, including proof of 25-year exemption, and then transported to the buyer or the importer's facility. The process takes 6 to 12 weeks from auction to delivery and involves auction fees, shipping costs, customs duties, port fees, domestic transportation, and the importer's margin. All in, the import process adds $3,000 to $8,000 or more on top of the auction price, depending on the vehicle and logistics. This pipeline has also created an ecosystem of middlemen, import brokers, shipping agents, customs specialists, and facilitators who range from deeply knowledgeable professionals to outright scammers. The market's growth has attracted people looking to cash in without providing real value, and horror stories of botched imports, misrepresented cars, and disappeared deposits are not uncommon. If you're importing a JDM car, work with established importers who have verifiable track records, transparent pricing, and references from previous customers. JDM culture isn't just about the cars as they came from the factory. It's equally about what people do to them after purchase. The modification culture, the tuning scene, the build culture, the aftermarket industry is inseparable from why these cars became legendary. Japanese performance cars from the golden era were designed with modification in mind, or at least they were engineered with enough margin that modification was rewarded rather than punished. The 2JZ GTE can handle 800 to 1,000 plus horsepower on stock internals because Toyota over-engineered the block, the crank, and the rods beyond what was needed for the factory output. The RB26 Det has a similar reputation. The 4G63 in the Lancer Evolution is another bulletproof platform that responds to boost increases with linear, predictable power gains. This tunability created an aftermarket industry, initially in Japan, then globally, that produced an enormous ecosystem of performance parts, turbo kits, exhaust systems, intercoolers, engine management systems, suspension components, wheels, body kits. The Japanese aftermarket became its own industry worth billions of dollars. Companies like HKS, Gredi, Tomei, Cusco, Tyne, Rays, and dozens of others built their businesses on the golden era platform cars. The Japanese tuning shops became legends themselves. Top Secret, known for insane high-speed super builds. Mines, famous for their Skyline GTR builds that were as refined as they were fast. Or Memiya, the rotary specialists who pushed FDRX7s to their absolute limits. Spoon Sports, the Honda specialists who proved that naturally aspirated perfection was a valid philosophy. These shops weren't just mechanics, they were artists, and their builds became aspirational benchmarks for the global community. The modification culture amplified the car's desirability because it showed what they were capable of beyond factory spec. A stock Supra making 320 horsepower is impressive. A built Supra making 1,200 horsepower on a stock bottom-end engine is legendary. The gap between factory and potential, that vast, explorable space of modification and tuning, is part of what makes these platforms endlessly fascinating. Every build is different, every owner's vision is unique. The car is a canvas, and the aftermarket is the paint. Ironically, this modification culture has also bifurcated the market. Stock, unmolested examples command the highest prices from collectors who want factory originality, but well-built, tastefully modified examples have their own audience and their own premium, especially if the build uses period-correct parts from respected brands. A Supra running a genuine HKS TO4Z turbo kit from the late 90s has a different kind of authenticity than a bone stock car. Both are valuable, both tell a story. They're just different stories. Part of understanding why these cars are revered requires understanding how Japanese engineering in this era differed from European and American approaches. European sports cars of the 90s, Porsches, BMWs, Ferraris, were built with a philosophy of refinement, exclusivity, and brand prestige. They were excellent cars, but they were priced for exclusivity and designed with an expectation that the buyer valued the badge as much as the driving experience. Maintenance was expensive, reliability was variable, the ownership experience was aspirational but demanding. American performance cars, Corvettes, Camaros, Mustangs, prioritized raw power at a low price. Big engines, simple engineering, accessible performance. They were fast and affordable, but often crude in their execution compared to both European and Japanese rivals. The interior quality, the fit and finish, the attention to detail, these took a back seat to cubic inches and quarter-mile times. Japanese manufacturers found a third path. They delivered European-level engineering sophistication, turbocharging, all-wheel drive, advanced suspension geometry, aluminum construction, high-revving engines, at American-level pricing. You got the technology of a Porsche and the price tag of a Camaro. The NSX was a mid-engine supercar priced below a base Porsche 911. The Skyline GTR had technology that rivaled rally cars and F1 prototypes, sold at the price of a loaded sedan. And they added something neither European nor American manufacturers consistently delivered: reliability. These cars were built to Japanese quality standards, which meant they started every morning, they didn't leak oil as a personality trait, and they accumulated miles without dramatic mechanical events. A Supra with 150,000 miles is not a project car. It's a car that's been driven and is ready for 150,000 more. That dependability, the ability to be both extraordinary to drive and mundane to own, is a uniquely Japanese contribution to automotive engineering, and it's a significant part of why these cars have aged so well. JDM cars didn't become expensive just because they were good cars. They became expensive because an entire global culture was built around them, and that culture created emotional value that transcends mechanical worth. The Fast and the Furious, 2001. The cultural impact of this movie on JDM values cannot be overstated. The first film featured an orange Supra, a Nissan Skyline, a Mitsubishi Eclipse, Hondas, and an entire world of Japanese car culture presented as aspirational, exciting, and cool. An entire generation of kids who watched that movie in theaters or on DVD grew up wanting those cars. Those kids are now adults in their 30s and 40s with disposable income, and they're buying the cars they dreamed about as teenagers. The Fast and the Furious didn't just reflect JDM culture, it manufactured a generation of buyers. Initial D, 1995 to 2013. This Japanese manga and anime series about tofu delivery and mountain pass racing did for Japanese car culture what The Fast and the Furious did for mainstream audiences. The AE86 Corolla, the RX-7, the Evo, the Impreza. Initial D turned these cars into characters with personalities. The series has a massive global fan base, and its influence on JDM car values, particularly the AE86, which went from $3,000 beater to $30,000 plus collectible, is well documented. Video games, Gran Turismo, Forza, Need for Speed. These games put players behind the virtual wheels of JDM cars for decades before many of them could drive real ones. The emotional attachment formed through hundreds of hours of virtual driving translates to real-world purchase intent. A person who spent their teenage years racing an R34 GTR and Gran Turismo 3 has a deeply personal connection to that car that goes far beyond its mechanical specifications. Social media and the build community. Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and forums have created a global community where JDM builds are shared, admired, critiqued, and celebrated. A well-built super garners hundreds of thousands of views. JDM car meets draw thousands of attendees. The visibility creates aspiration. The aspiration creates demand. The demand increases prices. The higher prices create more visibility because now these are expensive collectible cars rather than old used cars, and the cycle reinforces itself. The culture isn't just about the cars, it's about identity. Being into JDM is a lifestyle marker, a community, an aesthetic, a value system that prizes engineering over luxury, driving engagement over comfort, and authenticity over flash. The community has its own vocabulary, its own heroes, its own hierarchy of desirable cars and mods. Buying a JDM car isn't just purchasing transportation. It's joining a tribe, and tribe membership drives demand in ways that pure mechanical evaluation never could. All of the cultural factors and legal factors ultimately express themselves through basic economics, limited supply and high demand. These cars were produced in finite numbers. Toyota built roughly 11,000 fourth-generation Supras for the U.S. market over a decade. Nissan produced about 44,000 R34 Skylines total across all variants, with GT-R V-specs being a small fraction. Honda built approximately 18,000 NSXs over 15 years. These weren't mass-market vehicles, they were low-volume performance cars, and the total production numbers are small. Of those produced, a significant percentage have been destroyed, crashed, rusted, parted out, poorly modified, or simply driven into the ground and scrapped. Every year, the surviving population shrinks. Clean, unmolested, low-mileage examples become rarer. And as they become rarer, the remaining ones become more valuable. Demand, meanwhile, keeps growing. New enthusiasts discover JDM culture every year through social media, movies, and games. The generation that grew up with these cars is entering peak earning years. International demand, from collectors, investors, and enthusiasts in Europe, Australia, the Middle East, and Asia, adds to the competition for a shrinking supply. Wealthy collectors who treat cars as alternative investments have entered the market, driving prices higher with deep pockets and long-time horizons. More demand, less supply, every year. That's the formula. It's why prices keep climbing even when they already seem insane. As long as the demand curve rises faster than the supply curve shrinks, prices go up. And right now there's no indication that either trend is reversing. The international competition element is often underestimated by American buyers. JDM cars are desired globally. Collectors in the UK, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East are all competing for the same finite pool of cars at Japanese auctions. Some countries don't have the 25-year restriction. The UK, for example, has been importing R34 GTRs legally for years. By the time a car becomes U.S. legal at 25 years, much of the best surviving inventory has already been picked over by international buyers who had access first. American buyers are often arriving at the auction late, bidding against a global marketplace that had a head start. Japan's domestic market also consumes inventory. Japanese enthusiasts, who have had access to these cars since day one, own many of the finest examples. Some are willing to sell at current market prices, many are not. The true collectors in Japan, the people with climate-controlled garages and single-digit kilometer examples, may never sell, which permanently removes the highest quality examples from the available supply. The cars that come to market are increasingly the second and third tier, higher mileage, more wear, more compromises, which puts even more upward pressure on the prices of truly exceptional examples when they do appear. People increasingly view certain JDM cars as investments, and compared to some traditional investments, the returns have been exceptional. An R32 GTR purchased for $25,000 in 2012 might be worth $80,000 to $120,000 today. A clean FD RX-7 bought for $15,000 in 2010 could be worth $60,000 in 2010, could be worth $60,000 to $80,000 now. Those are returns that would make a hedge fund manager jealous. But treating cars as investments carries risks that stocks and bonds don't. Cars require storage, insurance, and maintenance. They can be damaged, stolen, or depreciated by market shifts. The JDM market is driven heavily by sentiment and culture, which can change. If the generation that drives demand ages out of the market without a replacement generation willing to pay the same prices, values could flatten or decline. There's also the modification question. A bone stock original condition car is typically worth the most in the collector market. Modified cars, even tastefully and expensively modified ones, often sell for less than stock equivalents because collectors want original. This creates a tension. The culture celebrates modification, but the investment thesis favors preservation. The smart money in JDM investing right now looks at the 25-year import calendar and targets cars that will become U.S. legal in the next 5 to 10 years. Models that have strong cultural cachet, limited production numbers, and high desirability but haven't yet crossed the import threshold represent the best potential for appreciation. The R34 GTR's price trajectory, rising sharply in the years before and during its eligibility window, is the template. But is it a good investment? That depends on your definition. If you buy a car you love, drive it, enjoy it, maintain it, and it appreciates in value, that's the best possible outcome. You got the emotional return and the financial return. If you buy a car purely as a financial bet, park it in a climate-controlled garage and never drive it, you might make money, but you've missed the entire point of why these cars are valuable in the first place. They're valuable because people love driving them. If nobody drives them, the magic that created their value erodes. This is the question on every JDM enthusiast's mind, and the honest answer is probably not a pop, but possibly a plateau. The factors supporting current prices are structural, not speculative. The supply is finite and shrinking. The cultural significance is embedded in global media that will be watched and played for decades. The 25-year import rule continues to release pent-up demand on a predictable schedule. The demographic that wants these cars is large, global, and financially capable. For a true bubble pop, a rapid, dramatic price collapse, you'd need one or more of the following: a massive recession that forces collectors to liquidate, a sudden cultural shift away from 90s JDM nostalgia, a discovery of large hidden supply, unlikely, or government intervention that makes these cars less desirable, new emissions restrictions, insurance barriers, etc. What's more likely is a gradual moderation. The sharpest appreciation has probably already happened for the most iconic models. An R34 GTR that went from $50,000 to $300,000 in a decade is unlikely to go from $300,000 to $1.5 million in the next decade. The growth rate may slow as prices reach levels that exclude all but the wealthiest buyers. Lower-tier JDM cars. The cars that aren't Supras, GTRs, and NSXs may continue to appreciate at more moderate rates, as the halo effect of the top-tier cars lifts the entire segment. The cars at the very top of the market, ultra-low mileage, completely stock, fully documented examples, will probably hold value or continue to appreciate because they're essentially irreplaceable artifacts. The cars in the middle, driven, modified, imperfect but authentic, will face more price sensitivity as the market matures and buyers become more discriminating. JDM literally means Japanese domestic market, cars built for sale in Japan, often with higher specs than export models. The 1990s golden era produced legendary cars because Japanese manufacturers were in an engineering arms race fueled by an economic boom. The gentleman's agreement capped advertised power at 276 HP, while actual output was much higher, creating engines with massive headroom for modification. The 25-year federal import rule creates artificial scarcity for cars under 25 and demand explosions for cars that cross the threshold. Movies, anime, video games, and social media built a global culture around JDM cars that transcends their mechanical value. Limited production numbers and a shrinking surviving population create genuine scarcity. Prices are supported by structural factors: finite supply, growing demand, cultural permanence, not pure speculation. The market is more likely to plateau than pop. A 1994 Toyota Supra is not worth $176,000 because it's a better car than a new Corvette Z06 that costs less. It's not faster, it's not more comfortable, it doesn't have better technology, and it doesn't have a warranty. On a spec sheet, the Supra loses to almost any modern performance car in its price range. But the Supra isn't competing on specs, it's competing on meaning. It represents a specific era of Japanese engineering ambition. It carries the weight of a culture, movies, games, communities, identities. It's scarce and getting scarcer. It's the car that a generation of enthusiasts grew up dreaming about, and now those enthusiasts have the money to make the dream real. The price isn't paying for a car. It's paying for a story, a membership, a piece of history, and the fulfillment of a 20-year-old fantasy. Whether that's worth $106,000 is a question only you can answer. But now you understand why someone else answered yes. If this video finally explained the JDM market or justified a purchase you've been trying to talk yourself into, hit like. Drop your dream JDM car in the comments so we can see which one wins the popularity contest this time. And subscribe so you stop asking why is that old car so expensive at every car meet and start being the person who explains it. Later.